All right, hello there, everyone. It's Micah here. I appreciate you stopping by my channel, and maybe drop a like and a subscription if you want to hear, more on maybe some of the content that I might bring, or, of course, if you feel there's any value in it. But just getting right to the topic here, I'm talking about vision, right? We're talking about mainly myopia, right? But also farsightedness, right? The thing is, I think a lot of us are unaware of how different our eyes can be from each other, right? And in fact, for me, I'm just giving you, my personal experience, and I don't claim to be an ophthalmologist or optometrist or anything, like if I give you an exercise, try it at your own risk, you might want to ask somebody else, but I'm not doing like anything that I think is really particularly dangerous. But there might be an eye doctor stop by here if you have a correction for me. Same time, if you're watching this video, I'd say, and take it with a grain of salt. Like, I don't think that just because someone's a doctor, they know every single thing. I think they're very likely studied in a field, and they probably do know a lot of the facts. In most cases, you're going to want to turn to them. But it doesn't mean that just because they're a licensed doctor, they're going to know every single thing. And of course, likewise, on the other end of the spectrum, just because someone isn't a licensed professional doctor doesn't mean they don't know anything, right? So you do have to use your best judgment, right? But talking about myopia, right? Nearsightedness, right? The thing is, like I said, our eyes can be dramatically different from each other, and we might not even really realize it because we haven't really tested them independently very much. Maybe we went to an eye doctor, or maybe you have glasses or something like that, or lenses, and you've been to a doctor and had a test, and you can see maybe that one eye is stronger than the other. But the fact is, when we go for an eye test, an eye exam, a lot of times we're really only at one distance. So we're, and this just some of this might be like some speculation and theory in terms of how your vision and eye works, right? But the idea is that your lenses contract and expand to see things that are far and close, right? Maybe it's not necessarily, I could be wrong about this, maybe it's not necessarily about whether they're far or close, but rather about whether they're large or small and the size of the detail that we're seeing. Because think about it, when you look into a mirror, and you see something in the distance in the mirror, it still looks blurry, like as if there is depth there. But the mirror is flat, right? The mirror is flat, so how does that happen? Well, maybe that's because, we're really talking about the size of what we're looking at in proportion to like our distance. If it's farther away, it's going to look smaller. So how do we discern those details with myopia when they're far away, right? And being able to get rid of the blurriness, maybe the cloudiness. Now, you could have other factors, and this ain't going to see, like I'm saying, this is going to solve everything or every case. You have cataracts or, some other aberrations or something besides just the most prominently known by myopia, where your lenses seem to be lazy or atrophied, right? They seem to be lazy or atrophied. You can't see something that's far away. Maybe you can see up close reasonably well, you can read fine, whatever, but far away with the myopia, you have a hard time seeing. Now, is it really with both eyes? Is it the same with both eyes? That's important to test because you want to identify which eye is really the problem eye with that distance, or maybe really rather that size, right? Because we might think you got to look far into the distance and everything, but is that really the case? What I'm saying is that we really want to focus on the size and the detail of what we're looking at, maybe, right? Because, like I said, if you look into a mirror could be right in front of you, but still, objects that you are in the distance in the mirror will be blurry. How does that make sense if they are right in front of us, right? So it's something more than just the distance is what my speculation is. I don't claim to know every detail about that, but tell me what you think. Right? Would you agree with that? That sounds like correct. So when you see out into the far in the distance, that's great. But what really matters is that you're seeing clarity of what you're looking at. It could be just across the room. If it's a small thing, it's like looking at a mountain way across the landscape hundreds of miles away or something like that, right? So really it's a matter of whatever you're looking at, being able to bring it into focus on a small level. And that's like an eye chart, right? This is one of the biggest exercises I would say is really good for helping to test your vision. Is kind of like an eye chart. You could use your computer screen, right? And have the text on your computer screen. Maybe you're looking at your email or something like that. Get up close to it and see, hopefully you can see it pretty clear there. Do it with each eye separately, right? Cover your eye gently, not too hard. You don't want to like manipulate the vision of your eye by pressing on it too much. Maybe massage it. That's fine if you're doing it and you know what you're doing. But maybe when you're just covering your eye, you're just doing it gently enough to completely cover it, and use the weak eye in that case. Now, like I said, the eyes can be completely different. Like for me, see, my right eye can't see far very well, typically, right? Typically. Now, I've been doing some breakthrough exercises that have actually helped me to be able to see nearly 20/20, I would say. I haven't tested it per se, but definitely able to see clearly and to be able to read things that I normally would think that there's just no way I could read, right? So, doing a few exercises with depth perception. But like I said, it's more about size of the object. It's just the way we perceive it. Yeah, you're looking at something way in the distance. You're thinking, can I see the detail of that? But the reason why it's hard to see it is because it's small relative to you, right? So, you can do these exercises with stuff across the room. But I do agree that it's generally good to get good sunlight. Because I think in general is a big concept with your vision is really just getting good amount of light into your eyes, right? That's one factor, and right, like you have cataract or some other blockage, and what is the other? There's other kinds of things that can cause that, but it can be actually some kind of blockage or some kind of blurriness from haziness or something like that. That could be more than just myopia, nearsightedness, right? But like I said, your eyes can be completely different. Like I said, my right eye can see close very clearly. Right here, if I look at my hand, I can see all the detail and graininess and texture of my hand, right? My left eye, however, I have to attempt to focus it at this distance, right? My left eye is farsighted, right? My left eye can see far pretty clear, and especially like a mid-range distance. Right, you can see pretty clear, naturally, subliminally, unconsciously, right? Like if I just look at it, I'm basically able to just easily focus, right? So, like I said, with the close up, though, with my left eye. So you might test this yourself and test yourself and say, hey, which eye is stronger at certain distances? I've even noticed it's almost like more than just near and far, but it's near, a little further, and even a little further. It could, like you'd be surprised. Like maybe your one eye seems better up close and far, but maybe the mid-range distances is actually worse at, right? And I can't remember exactly some of the elements of how my eyes might have that effect, but certain distances could be different, right? But like I said, training each eye individually, because your most atrophied eye, for whatever distance or size you're trying to look at, right? The most atrophied eye, in this case, I'm talking about the right eye, which typically I would think of as the worst eye, because I'm trying to see far is probably what I think of as trying to you see better. But really, honestly, nearsighted, farsightedness is a big deal too. Obviously, for probably a lot of seniors, people that have their eyes might not be as flexible, and maybe that's the case. We want to do some eye exercises and some make sure you drink plenty of water, eat maybe a better diet that's more accommodating for eye care and vision. But for the most part, honestly, and I'm not trying to be judgmental, but there's a lot of different videos, there's a lot of different trainings, there's debates, methods. I know that a lot of people have probably read a bit about that. Anybody with vision problems, they probably checked it out at least a little bit. But the Bates method, and I haven't really looked into it very well. Like I've started reading like the Bates method book, probably 20 years ago for, I don't know how many pages I read, probably a reasonable amount. Trying to pick up on the exercise they do. I don't necessarily disagree with them, but I would say some of the simpler exercises that I kind of done, and I'm sure that probably some of them are like in those teachings, and maybe some other ones, of course. Many other people will probably show you some of the same things that I do. But, for like, be able to get your eye to see far better, I've seen pretty breakthrough results getting my right eye to focus, right? Does that mean it's always subconsciously like that? It's like, I just look at it and it's automatically. Well, I'm kind of actually starting to see that effect a little bit, where my right eye will kind of be in focus automatically a little bit more, right? Maybe not total, because it's very myopic. Like I wouldn't be able to read my computer screen. Like, it'll be blurry at just 2 or 3 feet even. Like if I'm close enough, it'll be okay. But if I get, 4 feet away, it's fairly blurry. And if I get to like 6 feet, if I'm just, in my natural state of myopathy, I would not even be able to read the words, right? About 6 feet or so, right? And then depending on how big the words are, of course, right? But pretty fine print, the average print of, the text on a page. on a 25-inch screen, for example. But, if you get back there at about 6 feet, maybe you find on one of your eyes, or, maybe looking with both of them. But let's face it, your brain kind of seems to rely on the stronger eye for that distance, whatever it is. So if my left eye is stronger at that distance, when I have both of my eyes open, it's picking up that stronger signal. And this is part of what I believe to be a big deal about, getting your weak eye to work correct, or, depending on what distance or size you're talking about, right? Maybe one eye is stronger with one thing and the other eye is stronger with the other. It's the way mine is. I wouldn't say one eye is necessarily the weaker eye, but when I think of seeing far, yeah, my right eye is my weaker eye. It's the problem eye in that case. Seeing distance, right? If I want to see distance, now I can still see distance okay if I have my both eyes open, yes, but can I see distance okay with just my right eye? Can I see things clearly at those distances? And right now I can actually see, opening my eye, doing some exercises today, that I feel like my right eye is a little clearer naturally. Like there's a bottle of Nivea lotion. I can see it here, and normally I wouldn't be able to hardly read it all, but right now I can read the word, the brand. I can, it's not totally perfect. Like if I sit here for a few moments, I can get it to where it's really pretty clear. Right? And what am I doing to do that? What I think a lot of people underestimate is how it takes time for your eye to focus and adjust to a new distance, and a good few tries, right? You're trying to develop a strength in a muscle maybe that's contracting or expanding your lenses. It's a lot like the muscles, and let's say if you're right-handed and your left hand, you start lifting weights, it might feel like, man, this is like, feels awkward at first. Start lifting weights with your left hand, the same, maybe your max weight with your right arm, you lift it, then your max weight with your left arm, you try to do the same weight, and it's just like, it doesn't feel right, it feels awkward. You got to really train that arm to feel like it's the main arm that you're lifting that weight with, right? Like it's your dominant arm. Kind of the same thing with your eye. Maybe my left eye is more dominant in the distance, seeing. I want my right eye to be just as dominant, kind of like writing with your left hand when you're really right-handed, right? At first it feels really awkward. Now, I've practiced that a bit, so I can kind of do it reasonably well with a feel of control, right? Feeling control in your weak arm, right? Feeling kind of like playing a guitar backwards, right? You play a guitar backwards, all of a sudden, if you're right-handed, now you're normally used to your right hand strumming and your left hand, playing the frets. When also you play it backwards, now your right hand's fretting. Your left hand has to find the rhythm of the strumming and picking and all that stuff. It feels totally awkward if you've never done it, right? But you find that if you did it every day, practiced a little bit, got a little better with the movements, it'd be just like learning a song with your left, right-handed or whatever. I mean, all of a sudden you get better and better, it become more natural, you start fretting better, and I've noticed that I can actually do that playing the guitar. I don't really practice like the other way very much. I don't even have a left-handed guitar now. I just play right-handed, but I'm just saying I did do a bit of practice with that to where I could feel kind of natural playing left-handed, right? So, if I did a bit more, I could probably get it to feel even more natural, more second nature, if you will, right? So I think about the same thing with my eyes, right? And I used to do a little bit of exercise. Like I said, I studied the base method a long time ago, but I didn't really get that much into it. It wasn't like a big deal. I had glasses for a short while. I was always at the mindset of I don't really want to wear glasses because I feel like it's like making it worse or something. It's kind of like a crutch, right? So, I can see okay with, I don't need to have glasses. So, with my right eye, however, is almost nearly blind practically. I say blind, but, because let's be real, being really blind is a real thing. It's much worse than what I have, even though, I would have bad vision, be unable to read things at just a short distance, right? But that's one of the biggest exercises I would do. It's kind of like having an eye chart, right, in your home at all times. And, maybe that's a good idea, right? But also just looking at the screen with the one eye and at a distance that's normally blurry, and just sitting there and staring at those small words that look as blurry as they look, seem unlikely as it seems that they'll ever come into focus, and just relaxing your eye with intention. Kind of like, Spider-Man, he shoots a web and it sticks to the surface, right? And it's kind of like your eyes. You want it to be on the surface of that object. You want to have control with your weak eye, right? You want to feel control, like if I can feel the control to write with my left arm, that doesn't feel very atrophied at first. You don't know the movements. It's like, you're trying to write an A, it's just impossible. But if you did a lot of it, you practice over and over, and you did it for 6 months to a year, you'd be definitely a bit better at it, right? You might even be able to write a sentence with your weak arm, right? And it's the same thing with the vision. This is what I've been doing a bit of, right? So one thing is the depth shifting, I would call it, and I'm sure this exercise has been taught by others, I'm sure, but I kind of do a certain versions of it, and I'm gonna come out basically looking at something up close, like your hand, or your fingers right in front of your face, right? So you can see it, and I'm nearsighted with my right eye, so I should be able to see it definitely pretty easily up close. Not too close; it'll be blurry with either eye. Like if I get up before about 6 inches or closer, it'll get to where it's hard to focus. But I can focus a little bit up to a certain point. I have to consciously try to focus my eye as it moves closer, but at a certain point, it's just blurry, right? So, but about 6 inches, and then looking at something in the distance that is normally blurry for that nearsighted eye, right? Like, something on the table over there. I might look at that and see if I can somehow imagine myself, kind of gluing my eye onto that distance, that object, and seeing it as clearly as I can, kind of briskly for a moment, and then switching back to focusing on the finger right in front of my face and the detail of the finger in front of my face and seeing it up close, focusing my eye at that level, and then moving it back to the other object at a distance, moving it back and forth, trying to get your eye lens to shift back and forth, right? It might seem impossible at first because the muscles in your eye are so atrophied. They've failed. They're so lazy. Your brain is so used to using your stronger eye that it just never uses that weak eye to do that exercise, right? So it's just like using a weak arm. You have to, just do what you can the first few times you're doing it, right? You do what you can. You don't really see nothing happen, and it doesn't feel like nothing. It's like a workout, right? Just because you worked out 5 or 10 times doesn't mean you're going to all of a sudden be able to lift, maybe 200 pounds or whatever it is. Maybe you're working up from there, but it might take you a little bit of time, but also persistence and intention. And even sometimes in a way, if you will, like if you think of lifting maybe 200 pounds, do you relax when you do that? Well, you kind of do want to relax when you do that, right? You press whatever weight you're going to press. If it's a heavy weight, you don't necessarily want to be totally strained up to do it. Ideally, you're kind of in a relaxed, conditioned state of mind, if you will, so you can lift it, right? You have the mental strength combined with the physical prowess to complete that task, right? And it's kind of like the same thing with this eye. You have to have the brain and the muscles working together, right? You want to pick up the signal. These are some of the things that I would do. Like I said, it's one exercise. It's depth shifting, right? From maybe a close to a medium distance to a far distance. And just trying to get your eye to, pick up at each of those different distances of whatever you can. It might, like I said, not seem like you can tell. Maybe your eye's so myopic it can only focus on the close thing, and you get to the other things that are blurry, and you just feel like there's no change. Just keep trying it. And like people say, oh, well, you only have to do these exercises a few minutes a day. No, it's not my opinion. My opinion is you do want to do these exercises for a good while a day. Maybe an hour or two, or on and off. A couple of few times. Does that mean that you can do that every single day? Maybe you can't always get it super, but try to focus your eye once a day, right? And the same thing with farsightedness. It's different. You're going the opposite direction. You're trying to see something close that normally is blurry. Now, in my experience, that's a little easier to kind of do. I can kind of consciously focus my eye up close a bit better than I can consciously focus my nearsighted eye on something far. So maybe tell me if you experience the same thing. But right, so one thing is the depth shifting with the eye, right? Now another big deal for me, I find, is that like different colors and different levels of light can affect your ability to focus maybe and see detail, right? Like the texture on a wall or a fine line. Now, one of the big things that I've noticed that seems to help me to get my eye to focus in at a distance was looking at the crack between a closed door, right? There's just a black space there, right? It might be really thin. And if you're at a distance, trying to be able to really see that dark line clearly on the side of a door that's closed, right? In the dark line right between where it's closed and You know, you close the door and it's sealed. It's usually a little bit of tiny space there, a few millimeters or whatever. Usually a pretty small space that might even be hard for you to see at a distance. And I'm looking at one right in front of me right now. Now, if I use my right eye to kind of, you know, it might take me a second to kind of focus in on it, but I can get that little black line in between the door and the door jamb to look pretty clear. Focus on. It might take a few minutes, may take you a few tries, might not seem possible at first. Maybe you're nearsighted and you see it's just blurry. You can't really distinguish fine lines and details, like such as, you know, between a door jamb and a door, right? But that was one of the biggest things that I find has actually helped me to quickly get my eye to get into focus, is identifying and being able to see that dark line between the door. And it might take you a few times running up and down and looking at it close, depending how bad your nearsighted ness is. But then really trying to, you know, just gently relax your eye into focusing in on it, right? And you can do this with anything. Like I said, the text on the screen, the door jamb, the edges of any object, you know, you want to see them clearly, right? Fine detail. But like I said, this is the big deal I think a lot of people underestimate, is that it seems to take a bit of time and a good few tries to potentially get your eye to focus, right? So it's easy to give up on it. It's easy to think, oh, that just isn't working. Oh, I just can't do it. It won't work. Oh, it just never, nothing, you know. But if you really, you know, you have to, maybe sometimes, you know, like you don't want to squint. You don't want to manipulate your muscles physically, other than maybe being able to somehow, you know, consciously contract and expand them, right? So you can, you know, change your lens, that way you can see a large or a small detail, right, if that makes sense. But, you know, being able to see the texture on something at a distance, you know, is obviously going to be kind of challenging, right? Because those things are really small at that distance, where you're trying to see a big thing, but you can't see the fine details. You can see the big object, yeah, but, you know, seeing those details, this is, like I said, you know, one of the things, looking at the door jamb until I can see that black line as clear as I can with just the one eye, right? The one weak eye, right? Where I can see it. Now you can see over here this door jamb. It's not, you know, it takes me a little bit of a moment to get it clear, but it's pretty quick. I'll get it to where I can see a little black line, and I can even gently just sit there and just look at it, and it'll come pretty clear, right? I'll be able to see that black line between the door and the door jamb pretty clear. It might take a few tries, but then I'll look off to the side and I'll notice other things around it are clearer, like as if that one thing seems to be particularly helpful for my eye to get into focus, right? So I'm still practicing a little like that, you know, to say, oh, you've totally solved your eye problems easily. You know, I've only been doing this really for maybe a couple of weeks. I've just noticed a big breakthrough, really kind of doing some things I've practiced in the past, but not really that much, maybe even as much as I have just this last week or two, right? But doing this a good few times, trying to break through the atrophy, trying to get your muscles in your eye to gradually strengthen up, doing a good few repeat sessions. Right now I feel like I can see pretty clearly over here with both my eyes. And I feel like it's largely because my right eye can see just a little bit better right now, because I've been, you know, practicing with it, and especially at this distance, right, which is about maybe 10 to 15 feet from where I'm sitting right now in front of me. Now, there's also a couple of lights that I have up on a stand that they have like little stem, you know, like a neck, you know, for the light. And they're pretty thin. They're only maybe like a centimeter or something like that. Now, with my left eye, I can certainly tell the definition and see the lines around it. But with my right eye, if, you know, like I can see better, a little bit better now because I've been doing these exercises right now. But, you know, it would be real blurry. You can't really even distinguish just that thin stem of that lamp, right? The same thing looking at a building in a distance, you know. The light right at the very edge of the building, there's like a glare of light, right? It's glare like double vision or something, because you're so myopic, right? You want to bring that together. What I did is, like, I stare at the door jamb, or I stare at the side of a distant building, where it's hard to really distinguish the side because, you know, it's fuzzy, it's blurry, right? But, you know, really just relaxing and just staring at that part of the building, the very edge of nothing but right at the edge of it, right? And really just kind of focusing on nothing but that, trying to think of your eye seeing at that distance, right? Trying to open your eye wide enough to really gather in as much light as you can. But, you know, another thing too is also subtle blinking, right? You might look in there and try to focus a little bit, gently trying to let your eye relax. And I see myself relaxing into focus pretty quick right now because I've been doing something for a little while before I made this video, so I can definitely feel like I'm responding faster from doing these exercises a bit. Like I can read this writing on a pen that I normally wouldn't think I could write. It's pretty clear. Today I was just noticing, doing this exercise, is that the stuff on the screen, my computer screen, that normally at 6 feet or beyond, or even just 5 or 4 feet, is just too blurry for my right eye to read. My left eye could read it, but my right eye can't read it, right? But doing these exercises, I've been able to get it to come in clear. Right, the little clock on the very corner of Windows, or unless I'm not sure if that's an extra program I have, but anyway, it's just very small writing there. Can I get a good distance from my screen and distinguish that writing? So that's, you can maybe, if you don't have any other problems, there's just basic myopathy, right? You can get your eye to focus in enough on a very small writing to be able to distinguish what it's saying at a reasonable distance, right? That's a big deal. It's like you said, the writing on the computer screen, getting a distance from it, using, your weak eye to gradually try to just gently, stare at one word that you can't read, and till, like stare at it for like 10 minutes, and then take a quick break, and then go look at it again, and then a couple of minutes, and, you give it a few minutes each time, and like I said, you might be sitting there staring for, half an hour, an hour even, at an object in the distance, trying to get your eye to really, not only gradually to focus in. Like I said, it might be time. Maybe there's something that's like really stiff, and it takes, time. It's trying to get to where you're trying to be. It's trying to, it like to focus, but it's just so stiff or myopic. It needs some time to gradually move into that position, right? To gradually move into that position to be able to see, like, for example, this dark line between the door. It's a little a little, let me say, blurry at first, right? But then I give it just about, a few seconds, and I just, try to relax my eye into view at that distance and try to notice that distance and pick up on that little black line to where I can see it clearly. I can see the definition of that little black line between the door and the door jamb, right? So I'm doing that right now. I'm looking up and down at where I can see all parts of it pretty clearly. Like my eye is literally focusing at that level, right? And like I said, it takes maybe some time, especially if you haven't done much of this exercise, or you're not doing it just recently. You might be going back to myopic mode. Right now I can see it, coming in pretty clear. I can get it to go pretty clear. Now it's coming in definitely clearer. Then if I look off to the side, I can see the stem of the lamp a bit clearer than before. It's like double vision, right? It's like there's two lamp stems practically. Can't even see it very well. It's very blurry, but I was able to get it very clear just a little while ago. Right now it's not as clear because I haven't been focusing on that point, but the idea is you can get focused in on that point and then look around at all the things that are right at that same distance and try to distinguish, detail what those other things. Maybe like in this case there's some books there, right? There's a planter, right? And there's a little statue on top of the planter. How well can I see that detail of that statue? I can certainly see it better with my left eye right off the bat. But today I was able to get it to where I can see it with my right eye pretty good. And if I sit here for, a few moments looking at it, I can get it to be pretty crisp, right? Pretty crisp. And I can even get it to where a book that is sitting about 15 feet away from me, that, I can't normally tell, like maybe with my left eye, I can maybe read the title. To be honest, this particular title is actually a little tough for even my left eye to read at this distance because it's a small title, right? But I was able to get my right eye to actually be able to read it today, which was kind of mind-boggling because I would never feel like I could do that. I mean, it's that small, and it's kind of hard to even distinguish this title regardless of the size of it. And if I sit here for just a moment, like right now, it's actually getting pretty sharp and clear. I wouldn't say I could totally read it, but I can distinguish the sides of the words, maybe a couple of the letters, and I know if I sit here for a few moments. But right now, it's actually pretty clear. It seems like some distances are quicker for my eye to adjust to than others. And like I said, some contrastings in colors of light or levels of light might be a little easier to know. Your idea is to get it good with all levels. But if I sit here and stare at this wall area and the books and lamp and the door and the different details, I can get my eye to actually be focused pretty good at that depth, that distance, that detail, right? And I can actually start seeing a few book titles there pretty good. And some things, maybe I can read one of the book titles, but I can't read a label on a little package that's next to it very well because the color or whatever. And I'm trying to get to where I can read, almost anything there. Some stuff might be too small still, but covering that one eye, it's a big deal, right? Then doing that depth shifting, right? I'm maybe looking at that, and then I'm looking back over at something close and trying to see it clearly, which could be, a little ambiguous, right? It's a little ambiguous as to what you're doing, right? Like I said, to get your eye to come into focus, right? So the idea is, like I said, you're looking at a building in the distance. Look at the side of it. Maybe there's a glare from, it seems like it's coming from the sun, but maybe it's really just that your eye. Look at it with the other eye. Does it look the same? Do you see the same glare, right? If you don't, then that tells you, hey, this eye needs to learn how to focus better, right? Really looking for a while at the very edge of that building and right next to it and trying to see the definition of the line and getting that little bit of glare to shrink up and disappear to where you can just see the solid object by itself, if that makes sense. It might be very challenging at first. It might seem impossible at first. If you give it time, give it repetition, sit there and stare at something for 20 minutes, try to get it to where you can notice any texture, any detail. So stare at something across the room. Try to, like right now, if I stare at this little plate that I have across the room, it's a dish. It's, I'm noticing with my right eye today that I actually feel like I'm really actually looking at it with I can see, like I'm computing what I'm looking at pretty quick. It's looking clear. And maybe it's the design that's helping too. So like I said, sometimes the design, the color, the level of light, the contrast of color could make a difference in how well or quickly you're able to get that eye to focus, right? So I just say, hey, look, don't give up. And like I said, there's a lot of different exercises. I get it. There's like palming. There's different things to relax. Maybe give some circulation. I see a lot of people talking about the tips for, I'm not saying those are wrong. I'm not judging anything. I'm just saying my experience, that's not really getting to the main core many times, which is really getting your lens, in my perspective. I could be wrong about some elements. Please correct me if you definitely feel like I'm confident I'm wrong. So somebody will probably chew one of us up over it if we're wrong, right? But like I said, I definitely feel like the eye, the main thing about it is getting the lens to contract and expand with some level of control, right? Strength and control, right? Just like you would try to write with your weak arm, right? Just trying to write with your left arm. So depth shifting, looking at something different, contrast, like in this case, a door jamb, right? To see a line. I can see that line a little faster. If I'm doing this here regularly, I can see the line. I can focus in a little faster. If I don't do it like all day and I try to do it, maybe it might take me a little longer to adjust. But right now I'm seeing this line pretty good right now. If I focus on it, I'm going to have to be kind of really consciously focusing on it. But right now I can see the line really good. I can see it, really clear. I can see both sides of this dark space between the doors, right? And once I do that, then I'll kind of try to keep that same perception of depth and vision and move off to another object on the side and see it just as clearly, right? So it helps my getting my vision locked in to that depth or that level of detail, right, as much as it can, to where it's like there. And like I said, maybe it's, like I said, your lenses might be stiff or atrophied in ways that maybe, it takes time for that one lens to adjust to the level of contraction or expansion that it needs to be to see something there. Maybe once it's there, it kind of sticks there a little bit to a degree, right? But trying to think of a good example, where something needs to go slower than normal because, it's stiff or atrophied. You can't just force it. You have to bend it slowly, if you will, right? Maybe in this case, like I said, some kind of stiffness of the cornea or the lens. I don't claim to know exactly. I'm sure we look into research and other people have. But like I said, I look at some videos, I kind of wonder almost, to be honest, even they might be coming from a professional source or an acclaimed, ophthalmologist source or something like that. I don't claim to know that every single case that is definitely true or factual. Not to say that someone's intentionally lying, but there could be some other elements to consider, right? So these are my tips for, like I said, getting your eyes into focus. Maybe let me know if you try, some of these exercises. Now, there's exercises, like you said, looking at your computer screen writing on your computer screen at a good distance and sitting there staring at it till you can actually read the word. And that might be very challenging at first, right? You know, you're sitting back there and just like so blurry, you don't feel like you can stare at one small word, right? One email address or something on there and see if you can distinguish any of the letters, right? And you know, maybe you can see it just come in a little bit more clearly at a time, right? Blink your eyes every few moments. Maybe that helps them to just adjust. Now, there's another big thing I do to get my eyes to adjust, my right eye especially, is turning my head to the side and looking out the side, like at the computer screen. For whatever reason, it seems like it'll pull into focus just a little bit quicker or easier that way. And then I'll try to look at it straight on, keeping the same level of clarity, right? Once I get it like that. Man, looking at it from the side, but really looking at, you know, things from all different angles of your eye, you know, looking at it from this side, where, you know, if I kind of still see the same thing as clearly or get it into focus, right? So, because, you know, different angles of your eye might have slightly different levels of length or depth or whatever is causing the cornea of the lens to be a little bit further or more contracted than others. Then you might notice those little aberrations. You turn one way, it's a little blurrier than if you turn the other way, or vice versa. So you definitely, in my opinion, want to try, you know, different levels of rotation. But like I said, from the side of my eye, I feel like it's definitely a good thing. I might look at the Windows clock. Maybe it looks blurry from, you know, it looks blurry from even here, but I can read it. But if I move back to here, I feel like if I didn't know what it said, you know, it wouldn't be easy to necessarily see it. But right now, I do feel like I am able to. I mean, I do know how to get it to focus, right? I know how to get it to, I sit there for a few minutes, relaxing, but intentionally trying to see the detail of that word, that number, right? Or the edge of that object, right? But specifically, I think with reading is really a good test because, you know, you can test yourself, hey, can I really read this word? What does this word say, right? So it's just, you know, like I said, it's just like an eye exam. You know, do the same thing at your home. You know, examine your eyes, right? Do an eye exam, if you will. Test yourself on some distant object. See if you can read the letters, see the pictures, distinguish them. Stare at them for a while with that weak eye, trying to lock your eye on to that distance, that object. And I'm just, you know, I'm sitting here doing, you know, covering my eye this whole time, right? You know, you can feel like a pirate by the time you're done with this, right? But maybe you can actually see a difference. And I do the same thing with the far-sighted eye as well, my left eye. So I've been doing it, you know, up close. And with this one, I can kind of consciously bring it into focus easier, like I know. But, you know, still, it's not fully. It's hard to bring it fully into focus, like, you know, to strengthen my eye's ability to see things close or, you know, make it more natural. Like, pretend as if you just have that one eye, right? Like, if you only had all of a sudden you had your weak arm and that was all you had, you know, you would learn how to write with it, right? You would learn how to write with it. Maybe even better than the other arm, for, you know, who knows, right? Because I don't have the greatest handwriting, right? So it doesn't, just, you know, that's silly. But you get the idea, right? You might learn how to write with it because it's the only arm you got. And imagine if you only had your right eye. Would you be able to kind of get it to start seeing clearly, more naturally, a little bit quicker? Because now it's your only eye. Right, your weak eye is your only eye now, right? If you only had the eye that was weak, you know, farsighted, would you be trying to maybe get it to where you could see nearer, quicker, easier, more subliminally, unconsciously, because it's the only eye you got, right? You know, you wouldn't have the handicap of your stronger eye at that distance or level, right? So it's just my few ideas, right? I think of some other exercise, like I said, looking from the side. Depth shifting to, you know, maybe look at it across a desk, you look at an object that's way across and then an object that's real close and look back and forth between them, right? And then, you know, like you have a 6-foot desk roughly here, I might put, you know, a coin at one side and a coin up real close to my eye about 6 inches away and try to focus on the one that's close and then try to focus on the one that's far to see the same level of detail. Right, the details, the graininess, the texture, the edges, right? The lack of glare. You're not getting any glare from your own eye, right? That's what I think, you know, we don't realize a lot of times we're getting glare from our own eye. I might look at a thin object like these lamp stems that I'm talking about that, you know, My right eye can see them. My left eye can see them pretty darn sharp, pretty darn clear. It's just a single stem. I've been moving to my right eye in its natural state. It'll look a little blurry. It definitely look blurry in general. Like right now, it'll look blurry. But I can sit here for a few minutes, and that's one of the hardest things that's been for me to like focus is this little stem of this lamp. So I look at the crack between the door, and I get my eye to focus on that again. Right? It's right there at the same distance, basically. And once I get it, feel like I can see that crack between the door pretty clearly, and I get my eyes kind of seems to be focusing at that level. I can see the texture that, in the door, the lines are clear. Then I'll look over at the lamp, and I'll be surprised how much it's cleared it up, right? It's cleared it up. So it's just a little exercise to where now I'm looking at the lamp stem, and it looks like just a solid lamp stem. It's not double vision blur with, glare as much, right? That's the same thing too when you're looking at it by it just itself, with something like that, small things or maybe small strings are hanging, you're trying to distinguish how many there are, or you could just trying to really see them clearly, right? That's kind of like something that's thin, right? Glare can be around that object real easily. It's thin. You want to be able to distinguish and see that individual thin item with clarity and, texture, right? So like I said, you're looking at a building in the distance, the edge or the side of a building, right? And, if you see a glare with one eye and not the other, it tells you, hey, this eye is definitely needing some focus time. To really focus in on that object, and it's kind of far in the distance, maybe, a few hundred yards away or whatever, or maybe you're looking at a mountain in the distance, whatever, close that strong eye, that, that maybe more far-sighted eye, whatever it is, the one that's not nearsighted, right? And really use that right eye to sit there and just gently focusing in that distance to absorb all the information, the light, right, that is coming from that object, and to focus on something very small on that object, right? That's what you want to do, is focus on the details of something very small, to make out a small letter that's on the TV, on the computer screen, or, to distinguish an individual tree in the distance, or the bright colors and the clarity and definition of the leaves of a tree in the distance that normally your eyes just looks at it looks like a green blob, right? But if you can get it to where it's crisp, more crisp, your eye is improving its ability to focus at that level. Now, am I saying that's going to totally solve your problem? Like obviously my eyes not like totally like just, I've only been really heavily doing this again. I've done it before. I've got my eyes to focus in the past. But, doing it again right now, I can really see that, yeah, it does seem to work. It really does seem like I can actually take this blue book over here, and if I say, I did it today, I managed to get it where I could actually read it with my right eye. That is a big breakthrough for me, right? Just being able to do that. Now, does that mean I can do it right away right now? No, but I've noticed it is sharper right off the bat than it normally has been. Like my eye's just generally seeing at that distance a little bit faster. I'm genuinely seeing that, and that's what I think a lot of people do, is they give up too soon. They just think it can't work. It's kind of like, I'm judging. I'm saying if you get kind of overweight, a lot of people think that, the only thing they could do is surgery. 95% of the time, they just got down and started, there's not, are there any fat people in Auschwitz? I don't know. You know what I'm saying? The idea is that, if you make a definite decision, you have a strong desire, 95% of the time, you could make those changes naturally, right? You could improve your vision. You could lose the weight if you really decide, bottom line, I'm not going to eat. I'm not going to eat that meal again. I'm just going to find my little mental things that keep me from resisting, to resist, maybe eating too many calories, more than I would want to, whatever. And everybody does what they want to do. It's not like, everybody has to decide what works for them. I'm saying maybe that's just an example, right? Now, the same thing with, the exercise, thinking that, maybe you did 2-3 workouts, you just didn't really, maybe you did them kind of serious, but bottom line, at the end of those, you didn't really notice much of a difference. It's not enough to make you feel like something's really happening. But if you did it for 3 months, you did it for 6 months, you did a workout every day, 30 minutes for 12 months, and it was with some reasonable intention, some level of focus, trying to at least do some level of intensity, more than what you're normal, you're going to improve. You're definitely going to build some muscle. You're probably going to lose some weight, depending on how your diet and stuff like that, right? So, but that's a matter of giving it some time, giving it some discipline, understanding you don't see results in just 1 or maybe even 5 sessions, still don't really feel like you're seeing any specifically huge results. Especially if you're not going intense with it, you're not like, you're just kind of casually, you probably still see some results with the consistency, right? It's the same thing with the eye. Be consistently exercising it, consistently, thinking about the factors like, absorbing information into the eye, the light, right? Using your brain to interpret what you're seeing, right? To interpret, sometimes you're looking at something distant, you can't even tell what it is because it's so blurry, right? I'm trying to tell you, what am I actually looking at? Is that a Mazda? No, that's a Hyundai, Maybe you can distinguish an emblem that's a little small thing that's on the object. Try to distinguish that little small thing that's on the object, right? That's something to really try to do to get your eye to focus, right? The reason I'm making this video is not because it's just theory per se. I'm saying this because this is actually, I can actually see a pretty extremely myopathy. I don't like I do. They haven't done this a lot, but when I have done it, especially recently, I've really noticed it actually makes enough of a difference where I can read something I normally wouldn't be able to read. Like, it really, significant, where it really was pretty bad, right? So let me know if you try some of these exercises. Like I said, focused, intentional relaxation, right? Trying to look at something naturally, not trying to squint your eyes. Looking at it naturally, looking at one word long enough to where it maybe just comes in a little better focus. It's just a little clearer than it was before, right? Blinking a little bit. Maybe looking away and then looking back at where you're trying to look, right? Maybe using your eye to cover and then open up and look again. Maybe that does something for you. Then blinking a couple times, I can notice it changes the blurriness a little bit. So, looking at it from the side, right, or different angles even, like that. Like when I look up here, I can see it's a little more blurry than normal. Maybe I can get my eye, and I can see it actually coming into clarity a little bit. I feel like my eye is actually getting more control, right? It's more control, like as if that's your only eye and you want it to be your stronger eye. So anyway, this is just my video for the moment, a little bit of rambling about these few exercises. I try to think of some other specific exercise. I might have some other videos, and I did maybe have one or two other videos, and I encourage checking out one of my other videos. If you see one at the top of this video, maybe towards the end, certainly welcome you back to this channel. But let me know if maybe these few exercises, you try any of them. Like I said, one of the biggest things though is really giving it time, where it doesn't seem like it's working, but after 20, 30, 40 minutes, a few tries of doing it 10, 20, 30 minutes at a time, seeing that you notice, wow, I can see it just a little clearer than before, right? Your muscles are strengthening. The muscles in your eyes are gaining a little bit more strength back, if that makes sense. All right, Mikey here with you. Thanks for listening into this video. Maybe pop me a line, or maybe like or subscribe. Of course, I welcome you back to check out some of my other videos, like I said. And until the next video, we'll see you next time. Have a great one. Bye-bye.